Well, we've been studying Ephesians, haven't we, on Sunday mornings? And as I said, we are on part 3 of our Happy Marriage series. So in part 1, we considered, didn't we, how not to do things. We met 3 unhappy Christian couples. And last week, we considered the big picture. What is marriage telling us about God? And Paul tells us the institution of marriage between a man and a woman is a real-life parable. It's a real-life picture, a real-life diagram of a heavenly reality. So verse 32, this mystery is profound, and I'm saying that it refers to Christ and the church. So the love between a man and his wife is a tiny glimpse of a far greater love that Jesus has for his bride, the universal church. And following that, we considered Paul's instructions to wives in verse 22 to 24, didn't we? And it wasn't a long list, just one command, but a tough command: submit. So basically, wives, do what your husband tells you to do. And there were 2 caveats: as long as it's not illegal that he's telling you what he's telling you to do, and as long as he's not treating you illegally. Paul tells you to allow him to be the leader of your marriage. As we said last week, in modern times this teaching has become controversial, but it really shouldn't be, should it? You're the one who picked your husband. You could have had any man in the world, you chose him. And then you married him and you promised at the front of the church to love, honour and obey him. So Paul's not telling you anything you've not already promised to do. So it may not be palatable, but it is hard. This week, we move from wives onto husbands. How should a Christian husband operate and act within the home, within their family, with their other half? Well, first up, before we even look at it, I want you to notice the disparity between what Paul instructs to wives and what Paul instructs to husbands. Often we think the wives bit is harder to obey, but Paul thinks otherwise. Who needs the greater weight of instructions, husbands or wives? Well, it's husbands. Paul thinks the husbands performing their role well is the key to a happy marriage. And therefore he dedicates 9 verses with instructions to husbands. Whereas ladies, he just gives them 2. So it's 2v9. Well, perhaps you're not married here this morning. Well, pay close attention, because maybe one day you will be. So we're going to look at men this morning. Your instructions. 3 simple points. 3 things a Christian husband must do for his wife. Point number 1. Husbands are to lead. Now, what does it mean to be a man in the 21st century? I think it's fair to say that men are more confused today than at any other time in history about what their supposed place in society is. So 50 to 60 years ago, things were much clearer for men, weren't they? The man was the breadwinner. His role was to provide for and care for his wife. While the wife's role, generally, at least in this country, was primarily to stay at home and look after the home and care for the children. But these days, with the rise of feminism since the 1960s, giving women a more equal place in society, far more women, and particularly married women, will go out to work. Sometimes a wife will earn more than her husband. That's happened to me. Keely at one point earned more than me. So men who used to have a clear understanding of their role have been left questioning, well, where do I stand now? What does this mean for me if I'm no longer the main breadwinner? How am I still a leader in today's society? What is my role within my marriage? Add to that, there's also been the ongoing feminisation of men over the last 30 or 40 years. So what do I mean? Well, this may come as a shock, right? But the whole education system in the UK has been designed for girls, or favours girls, should I say. Why do girls do better at school than boys? Well, it's because schools are run by women for women. They operate generally according to more feminine values. So think about it. What do little boys want to do? Well, they want to wrestle. They want to get stuff and pretend to shoot each other with it. They want to throw stuff at each other. They want to compete. They want to triumph, don't they, over their peers. And there'll be winners, there'll be losers. There'll be a hierarchy. But what, particularly in primary school, are young kids told? Well, no, you can't do that anymore. You can't play with toy guns because you might grow up to be a serial killer. You're violent, you're toxic, little boys. There's something unethical about your masculinity. So they tell young boys, and I know because I was a primary school teacher, they say, you need to act like girls. You need to think like girls. Don't be a boy, be more like a girl. So you need to talk through your problems, talk through your feelings. And there's nothing wrong with talking through your feelings, but sometimes boys don't want to do that. And of course, since we don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, well, don't have a winner's medal, have a participation medal. Men have slowly but surely been stripped of their value in our society. And I think as we look at society as a whole, and even within the church, men seem to have lost all confidence in their abilities and their roles. They've been told since they were 4 or 5 that they've got to stifle their masculinity. They're not allowed to lead. Don't be men. It's gone so far, hasn't it, that now there's a general consensus among the ruling class that there's barely any distinction between male and female. So we get now the nonsense of transgenderism, where I can switch out my gender from one day to the next. So on Monday I feel like a man, Tuesday I feel like a woman, Wednesday I'm somewhere in between. Men have been brainwashed into thinking that there is no difference between men and women. And any differences there are, guys, are negative. But look, this is the biggest the biggest satanic marketing campaign that we've been hit with in the last 100 years. What does Scripture tell us? Genesis 1:27. God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. God designed men and women, and he designed them differently. He created man first, and then he created woman from his side. Notice he didn't create the woman from the man's head so that she rules over him. He didn't create the woman from his feet so that he gets to tread all over her. He created her from his side, from Adam's rib, so that they fit together like two pieces of the same jigsaw. Men and women are of equal value, but different in the roles they carry out. So husbands, there's a reason why, on average, you're bigger, taller, and stronger than your wife. There's a reason for that. In general, and again I'm speaking generally, men tend to be interested in things, don't they? Whereas most women seem to be more interested in people. Men are able to focus on one thing and drill into it. Whereas women focus on lots of different things. They think about everything. But men are the opposite. That's why sometimes you'll find a man who will bore the socks off of you talking about his stamp collection or a particular train set or their football team, because they focus on one thing. Men tend to look at things more objectively than women at times. Women can often be driven by their emotions. But men can strip those emotions away and just look at things with cold, hard facts. Now, look, as I say these things, one is neither better than the other. You need both. You need both in society. You need both in a marriage. But you're wired differently. Men and women are different. Husbands, your role is different to your wife. What is the role of a man in a marriage? Well, verse 23, the husband is the head of the wife. Now, we saw last week, didn't we? Jesus is the head of the church. He gives us direction. He gives us commands. He's the decision maker. And therefore, men, unashamedly, you should take the lead in your marriage. Don't fall for the propaganda of this age. Don't believe Satan's marketing campaign that there's no difference between the sexes, that it's somehow immoral to lead your household and instruct your wife on what to do. You have, men, great value and great purpose as a leader of your households. You're not toxic. You're made in the image of God. Now, one problem we do have is that I think a lot of men these days, they like the idea of taking a back seat. They like being lazy. It's easy, isn't it, to let your wife make all the tough decisions? She wants to anyway, so I just let her get on with it. It's easy to allow your wife to lead your marriage, particularly if your wife is intellectually smarter than you. You can sit back and put your feet up. But then, of course, it's her fault, isn't it, when everything goes wrong, when she makes a bad decision. But of course, men, that is not what God has called you to do. He's called you to lead. He's called you to take responsibility and defend your wife. So husbands, man up and lead your household. Okay, second point. Husbands are to love their wives. Turn in your Bible to Mark's Gospel, chapter 10. Mark 10, we're going to start reading at verse 42. As you do that, I'll give you the context. James and John, two of Jesus' disciples, have just asked if they can sit, one at his right hand, one at his left, when Jesus establishes his kingdom. In their minds, James and John think that Jesus is going to destroy the Romans and set up a new empire. And this was their way of asking for top seat at the table. They want to be Jesus' prime minister and chancellor. James and John are ambitious for power and glory. They want to be leaders. And we're told that the other disciples are angry when they hear about this, verse 41. They're not angry because they recognise the wrong attitude in James and John. They're angry because James and John got there first. The disciples at this point are like contestants on The Apprentice. They all want the top spot. They're full of ambition. They've got a lust for power, for glory. And so Jesus takes this opportunity to teach them a lesson in true leadership. Look what he says, verse 42. Jesus called them together and said, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them." Back in the day at Church Youth Club, we used to do something called the human pyramid. Anyone remember the human pyramid? You'd build a pyramid out of children. There was no health and safety in those days. No risk assessments. So you get 4 kids on the bottom, then you stick another 3, then 2, and then 1. And of course, they collapse. But that's how the Romans saw leadership. You want to get to the top, well, you've got to tread on everyone else to get to the very top. And when you're at the top, well, that means everyone serves you. They will be your slaves. The Romans didn't see leadership as a way to serve others, but as a way to serve themselves. So Jesus says, verse 43, "Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be slave of all." True leadership, Jesus tells us, is about serving others. It's not about being served. Sinclair Ferguson, the commentator, says this: "Greatness in the kingdom is measured by your service, not the amount of servants you have." And what's the model for this kind of leadership? Where does Jesus point them? Well, verse 45, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Jesus, who'd left heaven, he was on the throne of glory, surrounded by angels, worshipped by angels. When he came here, he didn't come to be served, did he? He didn't come to take slaves and a harem of women. He wasn't waited on hand and foot by servants. No, the Son of Man came to serve other people. He came to be the slave, to give his life in place of ours. So Jesus is the model for Christian leadership. Whether it's leadership in the church or, men, leadership at home. And that's really helpful, isn't it, when we think about husbands then? Husbands are to lead, but they're to lead within that one flesh relationship by serving their wife. So it doesn't mean, does it? To lead your wife means that you sit down with your feet up while she brings you tea and coffee and biscuits and all that and does everything. In fact, men, it means the complete opposite. You're to use your God-given authority to serve your wife. So back to Ephesians 5 then, let's look at verse 28. That's the key. Ephesians 5:28. Ephesians 5:28. In the same way, husbands should love their wives. How much should a husband love his wife? As their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes it and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. Paul gives husbands a clear example. Care for your wife with the same devotion that you care for your own body. So men, how do you care for your own body? Well, when your body's cold, you warm it up. When your body's hungry, you feed it. Some of you have been feeding it too much by the looks of it. When your body's tired, you rest it. When it's sick, you medicate it. Christian husbands, do you see? You care for your body. You cherish your body. You love your own body. Well, here's what Paul says. Your wife is your body. She's you. So love her. You are one flesh with her. So if your wife's cold, warm her up. If she's hungry, feed her. If she aches, give her a massage. If she's scared, encourage her. If she's sad, comfort her. If she's tired, well, how about you sit her down and you do the dishes tonight? If, and this happens all the time with women, if she's got a whole load of stuff to get off of her chest because she's had a bad week or a bad day, we'll turn off Netflix and listen to her. Paul says no one ever hated his own flesh. Treat your wife as you would treat yourself. That's the biblical model of love. Do you see how different that is to the satanic marketing campaign of modern Britain? The world accuse Paul, don't they, of being anti-women. They do it from a place of ignorance, though. They don't know what they're talking about. When the Bible describes a husband's authority, it's not the Saudi Arabian model, where women walk behind men by 10 places and they're not allowed to drive. No, the biblical model for marriage is that a husband's leadership is based on Christ's love. So just like Christ willingly laid down his life to save his people, that is how men should love their wives. She's not there to serve you, gents. You're there to serve her. She should be your highest priority. That means that at every point you put her needs, her desires before your own. Gents, you've got to die to yourself. Dying to yourself is tough, isn't it? But doing that, that'll impact, thinking like that, will impact how you use your time and your money and your energy. Those big life decisions, which the man is instructed to be in charge of, well, they won't be based on, well, what's good for me? What do I want? No, it'll be based on what's best for my wife. What's best for us as a one flesh unit. Now, of course, gents, that doesn't always mean doing what your wife wants. Because maybe she hasn't thought everything through. You've got to balance it up. You've got to do what's best for your wife. You've got to use your God-given authority to serve her. What is best for your wife, though, gentlemen? Well, third point, husbands are to improve their wives. I think there's nothing sadder when you see a Christian woman publicly acting in a sinful way. Not just because what she's doing might be destructive and damaging to the church, but because it shows that her husband has lost his nerve when it comes to sanctifying her. So what do I mean? Well, let's revisit last week. Look at verse 25. What's Jesus' agenda for his bride? Verse 25, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Verse 26, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendour, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own body. I first noticed my wife, Keely, on a church holiday in the Isle of Wight. I saw her there in the front row. I wasn't preaching. I was a kid at the time, or a young man. There she was in the front row, and I thought, wow, that there is a beautiful woman. I'm gonna find out more about her. And then, of course, I went out of my way to pursue her because she was attractive, she was gorgeous, she was funny, she was feisty. So Keely, I looked at her and I desired her. Is that what Jesus saw when he looked at his church? When he looked at us? Well, frankly, no. The church, Jesus' bride, we're sinners, aren't we? Because of our sin, spiritually, we are filthy in the eyes of a holy, flawless God. Now, this week, sadly, we've seen houses destroyed, blown up in Lebanon, haven't we? And we've seen the footage of people being dragged out of the rubble, covered in dust, covered in cuts, bruised and battered. Well, spiritually, that's what we look like to God. We're a complete mess, broken, destroyed. But unlike the victim of an airstrike or an earthquake, we're in the filth of our own making, aren't we? Our disobedience, our sin, our arrogance, our pride is what has made us dirty in the eyes of God. And so Paul tells us Jesus had to make us clean. He saved us in order that we can be a beautiful bride. He's washed us clean from our sin, ready for that wedding day. The day when Jesus brings all of his people together to live with him in his new creation, the great wedding feast. One commentator, Tim Chester, says this: Christ didn't love us because we were radiant. He loved us to make us radiant. How were we to be made beautiful? How do we continue to become more beautiful? Well, verse 26, by the washing of the water with the words. It is God's words that makes the bride better. It's following Jesus' lead and his commands that improves our lives. And in the process, we're cleaned up, aren't we? We're already saved, we're already clean, but there's an ongoing sanctification. Jesus' agenda is to improve his brides by making her more holy. And therefore, Christian husbands, we are called to do the same thing. We're to have the same agenda as Christ. We should be actively trying to improve the spiritual health and spiritual welfare of our wives. Now, I have to say this, my wife is already physically beautiful. She's wonderful. But spiritually, just like me, just like everyone in this room, well, there's room for improvement, isn't there? Christian husband, your biggest concern for your wife should be that she is growing to be more like Jesus. And that agenda should be shaping the way you lead. So Christian friend, Christian husbands, that will mean taking the lead when praying together and reading the Bible together. You should be praying for your wife. You should be taking every opportunity to encourage her to develop her gifts so that she can serve Christ better at home and in the church. Christian husbands should be encouraging their wives to meet up with other Christian women and to pray with them and have Bible studies. And husbands, it does mean, controversially, on occasion, you might have to tell your wife off. If she's acting foolishly or sinfully, you've every right to challenge her. Not cruelly, not vindictively, but simply by reminding her of God's words. She'll do the same to you, no doubt. You are one body, so what our other half does reflects on us, doesn't it? You're to hold one another accountable. Do you see, men? A husband's love has an agenda. So, Christian husbands, this morning, are you improving your wife? I think it goes without saying that you should be trying to improve her life generally by working hard at your job, creating a pleasant, safe, loving household, by setting a Christ-like example. But your goal, above any material progress you make, should be for her to make spiritual progress. Okay, 3 points. Let's tie it all up. 21st century Britain doesn't know how to handle the difference between men and women, does it? An ungodly culture always tries to pull us in different directions. Whether it's the Western extreme of trying to erase any kind of distinction between men and women and their roles, or whether it's the other extreme, the kind of extreme we see in Saudi Arabia where women have to cover their faces and walk 10 foot behind their husbands. But the Bible teaches that there is a big distinction between the sexes. We are equal before God, but our roles and responsibilities are very different. God's designed us and wired us so that those differences bring about something beautiful. A strong, happy marriage. It's the strong, happy marriage on which all successful civilizations are founded, isn't it? Married men, he's given you the responsibility of leadership. But that leadership is to be modelled on Christ's sacrificial love. And married women, he's called you to embrace your husband's leadership and to show through your submission the joy of submission to Jesus. So if you're a Christian here today, especially if you're married or hoping to get married in the future, can I encourage you to think about this seriously? To pray and ask for God's help so that your marriage can be a truly Christian marriage. So that a clueless, wicked, secular society looks at your union between you and your wife or you and your husband, and in that marriage they see the wonder and grace of God in sending Jesus to die for his church. And if you're not a Christian here this morning, well then see where marriage itself points. The relationship between a man and a woman can be an incredibly happy and fulfilling thing. Again, what does modern propaganda tell us? Modern marketing? Well, it wants everyone to see marriage as a trap, doesn't it? So it's like a ball and chain and dragging it around. Satan wants you to feel that marriage is a drag and a bore. But again, statistically, that is simply not the case. The happiest people in society are married people. Married people do better and live longer than unmarried people. They're more fulfilled on average than couples who don't get married. Children brought up with both parents in the home do far, far better than those whose parents get divorced. Marriage is a gift to mankind. But that gift is only an echo of a far more wonderful, far more profound gift. The gift of God in sending his own son Jesus to die on a cross so that he could pay the bride price for broken sinners like you and me. So that instead of spending this life and the next alone and in the dark, human beings can enter a glorious and wonderful relationship, a wonderful marriage. A marriage with the God of heaven. A relationship that will never sour. A relationship that will never get old. A relationship that will last forever. So have you taken God up on his offer yet? Spiritually, Jesus is asking you to marry yourself to him, to tie yourself for him. to him forever. So when will you say, I do?